Our discussion for this lecture will be about heavy metal intoxication and chelators. For the lecture outline, we're going to discuss heavy metals, lead, arsenic, mercury, the chelators dimercaprol, succimer, EDTA, unithiol, penicillamine, deferoxamine, deferoxerox, and deferripuron, and Prussian blue. So what are heavy metals? Heavy metals are generally defined as metals with relatively high densities, atomic weights, or atomic number. Some heavy metals are either essential nutrients like your iron, cobalt, and zinc, or relatively harmless like ruthenium, silver, and indium, but can be toxic in larger amounts or certain forms. Other heavy metals such as cadmium, mercury, and lead are highly poisonous. Potential sources of heavy metal poisoning include the mining, tailings, industrial wastes, agricultural runoff, occupational exposure, paints, and treated timber. Chromium, arsenic, cadmium, mercury, and lead have the greatest potential to cause harm on account of their extensive use, the toxicity of their combined form or elemental form, and their widespread distribution in the environment. We'll be limiting our discussion to three: the arsenic, lead, and mercury. Lead is one of the oldest and most prevalent heavy metal contaminant in the world. Once ubiquitous in nature, but due to many public health measures and policies, the use of this has declined significantly. So where do we find lead? No? Lead can be found in storage batteries, ammunition, metal alloys, solder, glass, plastics, pigments, and ceramics. And as of today, there are no useful purpose for this in the human body. So what are the important pharmacokinetic profile of lead? Lead is absorbed slowly but consistently via respiratory and GI tract. Respiratory tract is the primary route of entry for industrial exposure. Intestinal tract is, on the other hand, is the primary route of entry for non-industrial exposure or at homes. Up to 50% can be absorbed in children, no? However, only up to 10 to 15% is absorbed by adults. The low dietary calcium and iron deficiency and ingestion on an empty stomach increases absorption of lead. Fortunately, lead has poor absorption in the skin. Once it enters the bloodstream, 99% is bound to RBC or erythrocytes, 1% free in plasma. The distribution starts from soft tissues to hard tissues like bone, as follows: from bone marrow to the brain to the kidney, liver, muscle, and gonads, and then to the hard bones. It has the ability to cross the placenta. The half-life is 1 to 2 months. However, when it is inside the bones, it may take years and to decades before it gets cleared from the bones. This slow release response by the lead in the bone may produce symptoms for years on some patients who've been exposed to lead. Like, for example, patients who had gunshot wound where the bullet was not or never removed from the body. There were reports that they developed lead intoxication over a few years. 30% of this is excreted in bile, skin, hair, and nail, while 70% is excreted in the urine. Like some of the heavy metals, they have multiple mechanism of actions. First, they inhibit enzymatic function. They interfere with essential cations like calcium, zinc, and iron. They produce free radicals or oxidative stress. They have ability to change gene expression. They alter cell signaling mechanisms, and they disrupt membrane integrity. Although often without obvious symptoms, lead exposure can affect nearly every part of the human body. And as of today, there's no established safe level in the human blood, no, for this heavy metal. What are the different effects, no, to the different organs of lead? In the CNS or central nervous system, the developing brain of a child and fetus is the most sensitive target organ for lead. Effect may include behavioral problems, lower IQ, hearing loss, and learning disabilities. In adults, the CNS is less sensitive, but prolonged exposure may have behavioral and neurocognitive effects. In the blood, it may produce normocytic, microcytic, or hypochromic anemia. Lead interferes with the heme synthesis by blocking the incorporation of iron in protopyrin 9 and by inhibiting enzymes in heme synthesis. The chronic high dose exposure may lead to renal interstitial fibrosis and nephrosclerosis. In the reproduction or reproductive organs, high dose exposure may lead to stillbirths or spontaneous abortion. GI tract patients may develop intermittent or severe colicky abdominal pain, also called lead colic. Other symptoms may include loss of appetite, constipation, or diarrhea. In the cardiovascular, it has been linked with increase in both systolic and diastolic blood pressures in multiple studies. Also, with QT interval prolongation. At blood levels of 10 to 25 microgram per deciliter, significant cardiovascular mortality has been linked. Although prevalence in the US has since decreased, still a major problem in other parts of the globe. There are two major forms of lead intoxication, those that are caused by inorganic lead and those that are caused by organic lead. So, what are the difference between inorganic lead poisoning and organic lead poisoning? In inorganic lead poisoning, the major routes are GI and respiratory tract. The distribution starts from soft tissues, as I've mentioned in the previous slides, and then it gets redistributed to the skeleton. Because of its wide distribution and multiple mechanism of actions, there's a lot of clinical findings that you can see in inorganic lead poisoning, like CNS deficits, peripheral neuropathy, anemia, nephropathy, hypertension, reproductive toxicity. The metabolism and elimination route of this is in the renal or in the kidney, and some can be eliminated via feces and breast milk as well. So organic lead poisoning is very rare now, no, because of the public health measures we've undertaken to prevent its use in the environment and in the occupation. Before it is found in gas as tetraethyl and tetramethyl lead. No, in some areas though, it's still used as lead stearate and lead naphthenate. Um, the major routes for this are skin, GI, respiratory, and the distribution is limited to soft tissues with preference for liver and CNS. The major clinical finding is encephalopathy and sometimes hepatotoxicity. The mechanism of action is first it undergoes the alkylation in the liver to become triacyl metabolites and then there dissociates into lead. The metabolism and elimination pathway is primarily from the urine and the feces, and sweat is a minor route of excretion. Before we go to treatment, we have to emphasize that for these heavy metals, we need to reduce or prevent excessive exposure, especially in homes, in the environment, and in the workplace. So, the cornerstone of treatment are three: immediate termination of exposure, that's very important, supportive care, whether they're intensive or regular supportive care, and the rational use of chelation therapy, which we will discuss later as well. The intravenous EDTA or editate calcium disodium at dose of 30 to 50 milligram per kilogram per day by continuous infusion for up to 5 days only. And then it will be followed by oral succimer or DMSA after 5 days if the treatment remains to be incomplete. Some patients, like patients presenting with lead encephalopathy, may require intensive care as well. Cerebral edema may be given with steroids, mannitol, or hypertonic saline, anticonvulsants if patients start developing seizures as well. Retained lead objects, like in the GI tract or some gunshot wound, require decontamination or removal. So, endpoint or objective of therapy is the resolution of symptoms or return of blood lead concentration to pre-morbid range. Let's now go to arsenic, found mainly in semiconductors and many other products in the manufacturing industry. So, arsenic is a naturally occurring element in the Earth's crust with a long history of use as a constituent of commercial and industrial products, also as a component on some pharmaceuticals like our Fowler's solution before, and as an agent of deliberate poisoning. Recent commercial applications of arsenic include its use in manufacturing of semiconductors, wood preservative for industrial applications like marine timbers or utility poles, non-ferrous alloys, glass, and the turf herbicide known as monosodium methane arsenate or MSMA. In some regions of the world, groundwater may contain high levels of arsenic that has leached from the natural mineral deposits. Arsenic in drinking water in the Ganges Delta of India and Bangladesh is now recognized as one of the world's pressing environmental and public health problem to date. It is of historical interest that before there's such a thing what you call Fowler's solution, which contains one potassium arsenite. Well, it was widely used as a medicine for many conditions in the 18th century through the mid 20th century. Organic arsenics were the first pharmaceutical antibiotics or antimicrobials and were widely used for the first half of the 20th century until it was supplanted by sulfonamides and other more effective and less toxic agent. So Fowler's agent was invented by Thomas Fowler. He used this to treat a variety of ailments, including asthma, chorea, or eczema, pemphigus, psoriasis, Hodgkin's lymphoma, and leukemia. Because of its multiple side effects by the 20th century, including cirrhosis of the liver, idiopathic portal hypertension, urinary bladder cancer, and skin cancers, the solution's popularity diminished, and now it's banned for use. No, however, in 2000, it was introduced as an orphan drug for treatment of relapsed acute promyelocytic anemia in the form of arsenic trioxide injection. No, so that's the only accepted use, FDA approved for relapsed acute promyelocytic anemia. And melarsoprol, another drug that has arsenic, is used for treatment of African trypanomyosis. Pharmacokinetic profile of arsenic is that it's well absorbed by the respiratory and GI tract. It has limited percutaneous or skin absorption. It is metabolized by the liver via methylation reaction. It is also excreted in the urine. Please take note that although the absorption in the skin is limited, but clinical significant effects are also observed during heavy exposures. Again, it shares multiple mechanism of action like inhibition of enzyme function, oxidative stress or free radical generation, gene expression alteration, cell signaling changes. So this is just a summary of arsenic intoxication that we've discussed in the previous slides. The major clinical findings that you can see in arsenic intoxication are your cardiovascular shock, arrhythmias, CNS, you have encephalopathy, peripheral neuropathy as well. Others have gastroenteritis, pancytopenia, and multiple forms of cancer. One characteristic finding in chronic inorganic arsenic poisoning is what we call a raindrop pattern in the skin. Skin changes is among the most characteristic effect, typically develops after years of exposure. Raindrop pattern, as you can see in the pictures, are patterns of hyperpigmentation and in keratosis involving the hands and the feet. The cornerstone of treatment in immediate termination of exposure, supportive care, whether they're intensive or regular supportive care, and chelation therapy. Gut decontamination if needed, And for acute poisoning, the choice is chelation with unityl 3 to 5 milligram per kilogram every 4 to 6 hours or dimercaprol every 4 to 6 hours. Now, the last is the most famous of them all, probably mercury, the liquid metal, or also known as quicksilver. You've probably heard of this in the news when DOH closes down schools or facilities when there's a mercury spill. Why is this done and why is it important? In 1950s, there was this incident called Minamata Disease, secondary to mercury poisoning. So what happened in Minamata Disease? In the early 1950s, the resident of Minamata, a small coastal city in southern Japan, began observing some startling animal behavior. First, no cats would suddenly foam in the mouth, and then dogs as well. Birds would crash land, fish would inexplicably go belly up. Before long, humans too were suffering from what became known as Minamata disease. Patients developed slurring of speech, stumbling about, and having trouble with simple tasks such as buttoning buttons. The culprit finally emerged in 1959 when it was determined that the chemical company Shiso Corporation, one of Minamata's biggest employers, was dumping mercury in the sea as part of its manufacturing process, and that this toxin was poisoning people and animals as well, who ate local seafood. Chiso continued releasing mercury-tainted wastewater until 1968, reportedly causing at least 2,000 more deaths, as well as birth defects, paralysis, and other maladies. In commemoration of the Minamata disease in 2013, under the International Minamata Convention, 128 countries committed to the worldwide phase out of by 2020 of mercury. Philippines is one country who signed this into law as well. Mercury is also known as your quicksilver or liquid metal because it is the only metal that is liquid in ordinary conditions or temperature. Today, it has been largely removed in instruments like BP apparatuses and thermometers, but we still encounter them in some folk medicine, antiseptics, and cosmetic skin lightening products, the unregulated ones. It is mined predominantly in cinnabar ores. It is also found in electrolytic production of chlorine and caustic soda, electrical equipment, and thermometer, instruments, fluorescent lamp, dental amalgams, artisanal gold production. No? Thimerosal, once found in vaccines, an organomercurial preservative, are now removed from almost all of the vaccines because of this. Environmental release of mercury from burning of fossil fuel contributes to the bioaccumulation in fishes. Again, in 2013, under the Minamata Convention, 128 countries committed to the worldwide phase out by 2020 in numerous products like thermometers, pesticides, and batteries. And by 2025, it is banning this as well in manufacturing process like your chloralkali production. Philippines is one of the countries who signed in this Minamata Convention. Inhalation is one of the major occupational source of mercury poisoning. Absorption varies depending on the chemical form, and usually it's absorbed from the lungs, GI tract, and the skin. It is distributed well into tissues and mostly concentrated in the kidneys. Therefore, a fraction of this is retained in the kidney and also in the brain as well for months to years. It is excreted via urine and feces. There are three major forms of mercury intoxication: the elemental mercury, inorganic mercury, and organic mercury intoxication or poisoning. So let's first discuss elemental mercury. It's usually taken up by a respiratory tract distributed from soft tissues, especially the kidneys and the CNS. The major clinical findings are tremor, behavioral changes, or what you call erethism, no? Erythema mercurialis or Mad Hatter's disease is a neurological disorder presenting with behavioral changes such as irritability, low self-confidence, depression, apathy, shyness, and timidity. And in some extreme cases, with prolonged exposure may also cause delirium, and personality changes and memory loss. So other symptoms are gingival, stomatitis, peripheral neuropathy, acrodynia, and pneumonitis. The mechanism of action is to inhibit enzymes and alters membranes. The major route of elimination is urine and minor via feces. Inorganic mercury, on the other hand, can be absorbed in the GI and in the skin as a minor route. Soft tissues are again affected by this and has preference for kidneys. Therefore, the major clinical findings are acute renal tubular necrosis. Some patients also develop gastroenteritis, and CNS effects are very rare, although seen as well. The mechanism of action, it inhibits enzymes, alters membrane, and then it is eliminated via urine. Organic, on the other hand, has three routes: GI, skin, and respiratory tract. The distribution is limited to soft tissues with no preference whether to kidneys or CNS. So it's distributed well all throughout. The major clinical findings are CNS effects and birth defects. The mechanism of action, they inhibit enzymatic action, alteration of microtubules or neuronal structures. The metabolism and elimination route are the acylation in the liver and fecal elimination. Some parts go to the urine as well. The cornerstone of treatment is the same as the previous two heavy metals. You immediately remove the patient from the source, you provide supportive care, and then chelation therapy. The acute phase is treated with unityl dimercaprol or succimer. However, dimercaprol should never be used for elemental or organic mercury intoxication because of redistribution. No? So we will talk about that redistribution later in chelation therapy. So now let's go to pharmacology of chelators, the ones that we use as treatment or antidote for metal poisoning. So the basic principle of chelators is that it binds metallic ions tightly and make them or render them water soluble and ready for excretion. So chelators or chelating agent comes from the Greek word chela or meaning crab's claw. By forming a complex with the heavy metal, the chelating agent renders the metal unavailable for toxic interaction with functional groups of enzymes or other proteins, coenzymes, cellular nucleophiles, and membranes. Chelating agents contain one or more coordinating atoms, usually oxygen, sulfur, or nitrogen, which donates a pair of electrons to a cationic metal to form one or more coordinate covalent bond. So therefore, making them water soluble, ready for elimination. However, there are many limitations to chelating agent. One, the metal metabolizing effect of a therapeutic chelating agent may also redistribute some of the metal to vital organs. Like dimercaprol, it has the ability to redistribute mercury and arsenic to the CNS or brain, while at the same time enhancing urinary excretion. And you don't want that, no? Number two, they may also enhance excretion of essential cations like zinc and copper. Zinc for EDTA, zinc and copper in succimer. The long Another one is the longer the half-life of the metal in a particular organ, the less effectively they can be removed by chelation. Therefore, it is best given during the acute phase of toxicity. So here are the benefits of and drawbacks that I've mentioned. No, just a summary. The benefits: it's effective against acute poisoning, from forms non-toxic complexes, more water-soluble complexes. Remove metal from soft tissues, and oral therapy is available in some of those chelating agents. Drawback: it again redistributes toxic metal to other organs of the body. And of course, there's loss of essential metals, no removal of metal from intracellular sites. There are some limitations to some of the chelating agents. Hepatotoxicity and nephrotoxicity is a glaring side effect. Patients may have poor clinical recovery as well, depending on the phase of the treatment. Pro-oxidant effects like DTPA, so more oxidative stress is produced. And then headache, nausea, increased blood pressure are also other side effects. So the chelators or chelating agents that we use right now are dimercaprol, succimer, EDTA, that's very famous, editate, calcium disodium, unithiol, penicillamine, a derivative of penicillin, deferoxamine and deferasirox, and deferepiron. There's also what you call Prussian blue. First of the chelating agent or chelating agent are dimercaprol or 2-dimercaptopropranolol. It is also known as BAL or British anti-leucide because initially it was developed as an antidote to a warfare agent known as leucide in World War II. So it is used primarily as a single agent treatment of acute poisoning by arsenic and inorganic mercury. It is also used as a conjunction therapy with EDTA for severe lead poisoning. It prevents and reverses metal induced inhibition of sulfhydryl containing enzyme. It increases the rate of excretion of arsenic and lead, and it's usually given via IM and excreted via kidneys. The adverse effects of dimercaprol are hypertension, tachycardia, nausea, vomiting, lacrimation, salivation, fever, pain at injection site, thrombocytopenia, and increased prothrombin time. It redistributes arsenic and mercury to CNS, so therefore it is not advocated for treatment of chronic poisoning. Succimer or dimercaptosuccinic acid or DMSA is a water-soluble analog of dimercaprol. It's treatment of choice for children with blood level of concentration of greater than 45 micrograms per deciliter. So it prevents and reverses metal-induced inhibition of sulfhydryl-containing enzymes and increases the rate of excretion of lead. It decreases as mercury content in kidneys as well. It has protective effect against arsenic, and it is given orally and via IV route. The adverse effects, the most common are your GI changes or disturbances. It is also associated with increased aminotransferases and mild neutropenia. Editate calcium disodium or ethylene diamine tetraacetic acid or EDTA. This one is very famous. It's used in your purple top, no, to prevent coagulation of blood. In the case of heavy metals, the calcium disodium salt form of the EDTA is used because a calcium form reduces the potential depletion of calcium stores in the body, which is life-threatening, and it is indicated mainly for chelation of lead. Chelator of zinc as well, manganese, and certain heavy radionuclide poisoning. It has propensity to chelate extracellular metal ions more effectively compared to intracellular metal ions because it penetrates poorly to the cell membrane. It has limited oral absorption because first it's highly polar, and number two, it may increase absorption of lead if it's in the gut as well, no? So given IV infusion, excreted via the kidneys. Unithiol or dimercaptopropanosulfonic acid or DMPS is a water-soluble analog of dimercaprol. As of today, there are no known US FDA approved indications for these, but many studies have suggested that unithiol have advantages over IM dimercaprol or oral succimer in the initial treatment of severe acute poisoning by inorganic mercury and arsenic. It increases urinary excretion of mercury, arsenic, and lead. Given orally and IV via slow infusion, it is excreted via the kidneys. It has low overall incidence of adverse reactions or effects, and the most common forms are dermatologic reactions like urticaria, exanthems. Some patients have isolated cases of Stevens-Johnson syndrome or erythema multiforme. Ethylamine or D-dimethylcysteine is a white crystalline derivative of penicillin. The D-penicillamine is the preferred form because it is less toxic than the L-isomer form. It is used primarily to treat or prevent copper poisoning, especially in Wilson's disease. It is also used in severe rheumatoid arthritis. It is absorbed via the oral route. The first effects include hypersensitivity, nephrotoxicity with proteinuria, pancytopenia, and pyridoxine insufficiency. So now let's go to iron chelating agents or deferoxamine, deferasirox, and deferiprone. Let's differentiate the three. So deferoxamine was isolated from Streptomyces phylosus. The main use of this is parenteral chelator of choice for iron poisoning. And other uses when combined with hemodialysis is good as well for aluminum poisoning. The absorption route, it's given via IM and excreted via the urine. The adverse effects include hypotension, flushing, abdominal discomfort, rashes, and pulmonary complications. Deferasirox is a tridentate iron chelator. It is mainly used for the oral treatment of iron overload due to blood transfusion, especially seen in patients with thalassemia major and myelodysplastic syndrome. It is relatively more efficient in decreasing hepatic iron compared to deferiprone. It is given orally, excreted via bile. It produces symptoms like mild to moderate GI disturbances, skin rashes, and some liver profile changes like elevation of the amino transferases. The ferriprone, another iron chelating agent, is a bidentate iron chelator. It is mainly used as a second line agent for iron overload due to blood transfusion in thalassemia major. Relatively, it is more efficient in decreasing cardiac iron compared to deferasirox. It is given orally, excreted via urine, and has side effects of neutropenia and agranulocytosis. So these are the chemical structures of the several chelators that we've discussed. Ferroxamine or ferrioxamine without the chelated iron is what you called deferoxamine. It is represented here to show the functional groups. The iron is actually held in a cage system mimicking a crab-like claw. The structures of the in vitro metal chelator complexes for dimecaprol, succimer, penicillamine, and unityl are not known and may involve the formation of mixed disulfides with amino acids. The last that we're going to discuss is your Prussian blue or ferric hexacyanoferrate. It is indicated for treatment of contamination with radioactive cesium and intoxication with thallium salts. This was approved mainly because of concern over terrorist use of the radioactive dispersal units called 30 bombs. Its activity is ion exchange and mechanical trapping or adsorption of these ions. It is given orally and it has minimal GI absorption, less than 1%, which is very advantageous because it forms complexes with cesium or thallium and that becomes non-absorbable in the GI tract, therefore diminishing intestinal absorption in the gut. And it also interrupts enterohepatic and enteroenteric circulation of these cations, therefore increasing elimination in the gut. The adverse effects are very minor, and some patients report constipation, which can be duly treated by laxatives or increase in dietary fiber.